Without taking much time, we'll recite this short praise of the Prajnaparamita, the mother of all the Buddhas, perfection of wisdom. Paragate parasangate bodhi soha. Gade paragate parasangate bodhi soha. Gade parasangate bodhi soha. Shozana gujin So this is calling on all these different types of sentient beings, gods, non-gods, or asuras, humans, and others, to listen to this nectar-like teaching of the Buddha. So whatever Dharma discourse we are engaging in, we should have the correct, pure motivation, perfect motivation on the part of the Lama also. This should be the case. Hope you hear me. 1, 2, 3, check for English. So Lama should have the right, correct motivation, pure motivation, and give teaching. And particularly with the principle of taking refuge in the Buddhadharma and Sangha, and also remember, they're also cultivating bodhicitta. So everything is devoid of any true existence. Although they do appear to be so, it is just like illusion. And so focus your mind on emptiness, the 7th Dalai Lama says. And so without any negative emotions such as attachment, anger, jealousy, and partiality and so forth, the Lama should give teaching. And then on the part of the disciples, you should be devoid or absent of the 8 worldly concerns and make the Dharma a Dharma, turn the Dharma into a Dharma practice, and Mahayana Dharma into a Mahayana Dharma, and the Tantra, secret mantra, Vajrayana teachings into the secret mantra Vajrayana teachings. And so as the past masters used to say, it is not sufficient for the Dharma to be of Mahayana Dharma, but the person himself or herself must be infused with these Mahayana principles. And therefore, it is very important on the part of both the Lama, the teacher, and the disciples to have the correct and pure motivation. And therefore, to distinguish us from the wrong path, we take refuge in the 3 jewels, the Buddhadharma and Sangha, and then in order to distinguish us from the inferior path, then we generate the bodhicitta. So let us say this verse of taking refuge in bodhicitta 3 times together. But to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. Through the practices of, by listening to the teaching, may I become a Buddha to help all sentient beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until I am enlightened. By listening to the teaching, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. To the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until I am enlightened. By listening to the teaching, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings.
Do you need umbrella? Do you need umbrella? Umbrella. Okay. Okay. The tradition way. 你自己想想，空着了呀。哦呀，这里的，但居然那对吧？但上节中间那个any。
So Buddha Shakyamuni, the Bhagavan, has said in a sutra, the Buddhas do not wash away the sins of the sentient beings with water, and they do not take away the sins, the suffering of sentient beings, nor do they transpose their own realizations into others. Ay, chislada. And mindu. And only by showing the reality and truth does the Buddha help sentient beings and to liberation. Listen. And so the Buddha does not wash away the sins of sentient beings, nor do they take away the suffering of sentient beings, and nor do they give to transpose or shift their own realizations. And so, how do the Buddhas help sentient beings is achirudu. So how do the Buddhas help us sentient beings is, of course, having gone through the practices themselves, through the path and the perfections and so forth, and become enlightened, they show us the truth, how the things are, the mode of existence of things, and in order to rid us of our ignorance about the reality of things. ये क्यों हो रहा है भैया? Sorry, we have a problem with the transmission of His Holiness's voice. So, what the Buddha does is by teaching the reality of dependence, the dependence in terms of causality. So by understanding that things come through causes and conditions, we get rid of the ignorance about the law of causality and lead ourselves to higher rebirth, and then by teaching us the reality of dependent origination in terms of how things are designated, then the Buddhas actually help us to overcome this ignorance about the reality of dependence in terms of designation, and lead us to out of this ignorance and lead us to liberation. So, with regard to the last word that I quoted from the Buddha, which says the Buddha shows us the reality of truth, the truth of reality. And so this is about the causality, law of causality, and how things really are, how things really exist. And then we will find this this verse, Ye Dharma mantra, So this mantra is called the essence of dependent origination mantra. And then the translation into Tibetan says, everything comes from causes, and those causes are taught by the Buddha, and the cessation of those causes too are taught by the great sage. And so this verse shows that the four noble truths. And so the first line shows that everything comes, our pain and pleasure including that comes from their causes and conditions. So without any causes, things do not come by chance. And with regard to the cause, it's not some permanent, unchanging cause, but the changing, impermanent one. And that too, not only should it be impermanent, but the cause must give rise to a result or effect which is concordant with it. And Asanga talks about the unwavering cause and potential cause, and impermanent cause. And therefore, everything comes from causes means they come from such causes. And then those causes were taught by the Buddha. Those causes were two, means that ignorance gives rise to certain effects, which is to mean that how we circle in this samsara. And then another course is developing through the wisdom realizing selflessness. With the help of this, then the ignorance about law of causality and the ignorance about how things really are, this understanding of selflessness serves as antidote to these ignorance. And with that, what we arrive at is liberation. And therefore, there is the causality in terms of how the negative emotions and so forth leads to their own results, and then the causality in terms of how we are let out of samsara, reach liberation, is shown within these Four Noble Truths. And therefore, the teaching of the Four Noble Truths is the fundamental to the Buddha's teaching. And then the third line, which says the cessation of those causes shows liberation, and then the great sage has taught this. And so, after becoming enlightened, before long, the Buddha gave the teaching on the Four Noble Truths in Varanasi. Let's say the blessing for the tea first. Techebe nambara mimba same kyab namda shingla chubarashu. So with regards to this blessing, the words go like the qualities of the Buddhas are inconceivable, the qualities of the Dharma are inconceivable, and the Sangha community is also inconceivable, and making offering to these inconceivables, three inconceivables has inconceivable giving faith in these three inconceivable ones and have inconceivable effects, and I make offering of these tea and bread to the inconceivable refugees. So, when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, he said, this is the noble truth of suffering, this is the noble truth of origin, and then this cessation, and the noble truth of the path. And so, if the nature of things are like that, then how do we go about with discarding those negative ones and cultivating the positive ones. He says, the Buddha said, uh, suffering must be known, origin must be abandoned, and then the cessation must be actualized, and then path must be cultivated. And then, having said that, what is the purpose and of doing the practice based on such understanding of the Four Noble Truths and its workings? Their workings is that we will have liberation, and therefore the Buddha says suffering must be known, but there's nothing to be known, and so forth, which means that once you have overcome the suffering and its causes completely, then there's nothing to be known as suffering within yourself. And then similarly, there's nothing to be abandoned as origin of suffering. And then once you have actualized the cessation, the liberation, then there's nothing to be attained or actualized. And then the path, with regard to the path, there's nothing to be actualized, cultivated. And so these are the three, the repetition of the teaching on the Four Noble Truths 3 times by the Buddha. First, with regard to the identity of the Four Noble Truths, and then the second is the functionality of the Four Noble Truths, and then the fourth shows the effect together with the causality. And then, with regard to the Four Noble Truths, there are 4 attributes of each of these Four Noble Truths. The first one, the Noble Truth of suffering, has the 4 attributes are impermanence, suffering, and empty, and then selflessness. So with regard to impermanence, for example, there are the grosser level of impermanence, and then the subtler level of impermanence. The subtler level of impermanence means, the grosser level of impermanence means when a certain thing, something meets with its counterforce and comes to an end of its existence abruptly, then that's shows the impermanence in terms of the grosser level of impermanence. And then the momentary change in things is the subtler or level of impermanence. That subtle change in things is brought about by its own cause, which gives rise to it, and there's no need for a third cause. And so this the contaminated, impure phenomena, like our impure body and so forth, come from impure causes. And so that cause ultimately is the ignorance, ignorance with regard to the psychophysical aggregates. I mean, these psychophysical aggregates that we have now, the impure psychophysical aggregates that we have now in this existence, are caused by ignorance, and therefore they are in the nature of suffering. And so when you find that things are momentarily changing, you see that they are brought about by certain causes. They are under the influence of certain causes. And with regard to this kind of psychophysical aggregates that are impure, that are within us, and we can see that they are brought about by certain cause, which is fundamentally ignorance. And therefore, the ignorance, what it holds on to, is some kind of a permanent or an independent self. And therefore, with regard to this, it is said that there is no such self. And so with regard to selflessness also, we have the grosser level of selflessness, and then the subtler level of selflessness. So subtler level refers to the fact that nothing is independently existing, and therefore nothing comes without causes, and that cause is also impermanent. So since it is brought about by this ignorance, and which is in turn reinforced by craving and grasping, I mean, there are different ways of interpreting this too. And then, with regards to the cessation, it has the four attributes of being cessation and excellence and peaceful. And because of this, the peaceful experience that is a result of overcoming all the negative emotions, it is also called excellence. And then, with regard to the path, the four attributes are the path, awareness, practice or attainment, and the factor of the agency for liberation. And so what this shows is that that we realize selflessness, and then with that path, and then we that path actually with that path we emerge out of suffering and its causes. And therefore, the teaching of the Four Noble Truths is fundamental to the Pali teaching as well, and therefore both the Pali and the Sanskrit traditions. And therefore, when we give introduction to Buddhism, we must focus on the Four Noble Truths. I mean, give this introduction to Buddhism based on the Four Noble Truths. In our case, in the Tibetan societies in the past, we had lamas, when they gave introduction, gave teachings, they immediately went into the Guru Yoga practice. And so, with regard to the Buddha himself, he didn't start his teachings with the Tantra, and he gave teachings to us based on the Four Noble Truths. And therefore, accordingly, we also should teach to other people who are interested in listening to the teaching of the Buddha based on the Four Noble Truths. And then once with that, the people should have a very sound basis of understanding of the structure of the Dharma. And then when people are interested in actually engaging in cultivating the path, then we need to go into the three trainings of morality, concentration, and then the wisdom. And also, when people are more interested in practicing the six perfections, we should go into them, and then lead people into the tantric practices. Otherwise, just right in the beginning, if you give tantric teaching empowerment, and then let people do Guru Yoga practice on this, I mean, it will not be so effective. So, without the help of without the help of bodhicitta, even if you may have the understanding of selflessness or emptiness, it will not be the cause. That wisdom will not be the cause for overcoming the cognitive obscuration to full knowledge of everything. And therefore, it is impossible for us to reach enlightenment, Buddhahood, without the six perfections and the bodhicitta and the understanding of selflessness. And therefore, in order for the Buddhadharma, and particularly the Mahayana, to become a Mahayana teaching, and then the secret mantra Vajrayana teaching to become a Vajrayana teaching, we need to really have the sound basis of these teachings of the Buddha. And so the Buddha began his teaching with the teaching on Four Noble Truths. And so we have the four different philosophical schools within Buddhism. And each of them have their own way of identifying what this the liberation or nirvana is. So In order to understand precisely what liberation is, we need to understand the content, what is taught in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And then there is the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, which also includes the Samdhi Nimochana Sutra. But in that sutra, what is taught is that it's interpreted that the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma, teaching that things have no true identity of themselves, is somehow interpreted according to the Chittamatra view. And so, apart from that, we have the third turning of the wheel sutra, which is the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, which actually accords with the teaching of emptiness, and which is taught in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras as well. Not only that, this sutra also teaches the clear light mind. This is the subjective mind. And this Tathagata Garbha Sutra becomes the source of the Maya Anuttara Tantra by Maitreya. And so this clear light mind is the basis for the path, the true path that is taught in, that is the Fourth Noble Truth. And then, with regard to actualizing this the clear light or luminous awareness mind, it is emphasized particularly in the highest yoga tantra. And so this shows the path in the tantra. And therefore the Buddha first laid down the foundation with the Four Noble Truths, and then he added a next level of the walls. And then he went on to add the roofs and so forth. With regard to us Tibetans, of course, we begin with the Tantra, which is the topmost teaching of the Buddha. Of course, it may have its own significance, but we also should know the circumstances well and give a good understanding of the whole structure of Buddhism to people according to their own level. And so that we are able to introduce the Dharma which befits people's mentality and dispositions. So with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, we also, when we do the tantric initiation, of course, we will have, during the initiation, generation of bodhicitta, and then taking bodhisattva vows, and also tantric vows. And so with regard to the morality, we have these vows, the Pratamoksha vow and so forth. And then with regard to the concentration, without the single-pointed concentration, we won't be able to have very highly developed wisdom. Perhaps when we are at the beginning of the path of accumulation, it's maybe okay without even if we don't have the this concentration, single-pointed concentration, but to go beyond that, the intermediate and then the great path of accumulation and so forth, there's no way we can go about with the progression without the single-pointed concentration. And generally speaking, we have the concentration which is also similar to, common with the non-Buddhist traditions. And then, with regard to the three trainings generally, these are also common to non-Buddhist traditions as well. But when it comes to within the context of the Buddhadharma, we need to develop a morality which serves as the foundation for liberation, nirvana. For that liberation, of course, we need to understand selflessness. And so on the basis of understanding the selflessness, then when we take the Pratimoksha vows, beginning with the 24-hour vows, and then the Upasaka vows and so forth, they become, they serve as a foundation for that liberation. So, since we have to develop the three trainings based on the understanding of the selflessness, within the context of the Buddhism, then the three trainings become higher trainings. And so, in order to develop vipassana, which is this special insight into selflessness, we need to have this single-pointed concentration to for developing this special insight into selflessness, which helps us to go into the to reach liberation as well. And then the 37 practices or 37 factors of enlightenment are actually for liberation. This gives us a framework of the Buddhism. And then with regard to the the establishment of mindfulness, it helps us to develop this insight. And when we look at the body, for example, as it is said in Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, this body is like a machine for producing waste. So when you really think closely about this body with mindfulness, you will see this fact. When I visited Thailand once, there are pictures of dead bodies, which are 1 day old or few days old, and 1 week or few weeks, and so forth. So we see these bodies, the corpses changing, become looking the bluish and so forth, and then decomposing. So we also, it seems, need these pictures, such pictures, in front of our monasteries, instead of the deities on the walls and so forth, because in order to counter our attachment to this kind of body that we have, such as clinging to the body as being pure, permanent, and truly existent, and so forth. So I felt quite admired when I saw those pictures, and thought that a true practitioner of Buddhism should have these pictures. And so with the mindfulness of a body, we should see the suffering nature of the body, and then with mindfulness of feeling or sensation, we should develop understanding of the origin of suffering, and then with mindfulness of mind, establishing the mindfulness of the mind. Of course, when we look at our mind, it really flies by, like changes very quickly. Although we do have this notion of the mind being something permanent, but we see that it changes momentarily. When we think about the past and futures in senses of mind and so forth, we see that impermanence. And then that helps to direct our mind into selflessness. And then this the mindfulness of phenomena helps us to discard what is unwanted and negative ones, and then cultivate the positive ones. And so, in this way, through the four mindfulness establishment of mindfulnesses, we can see the suffering nature of the body, and then our own pain and pleasure are also impermanent, and that they cause us the origin as they actually serve as the causes of suffering. And then, with regard to the mind, we can see how the mind cannot be found through analysis. That mind is selfless. And then, with regard to the mindfulness of phenomena, we can reject even and that nothing is objectively existing. Even within the Madhyamaka schools, there are those who actually assert the sixth consciousness as being the person's identity. And also alaya vijnana in the case of the Chittamatra, because without the alaya vijnana, this foundation consciousness, they are not able to actually assert how we leave our imprints of karma and so forth on the mind and self. And so, unless we are able to not being able to assert that things are merely that things are merely designated, then they have to go to such assertions. But if you really were to look at the person, I mean, there's nothing that you can actually pinpoint as being the person within the psychophysical aggregates, even within the mind itself, the consciousness itself. And therefore, you will, if you really investigate into the nature of the self, nothing within the psychophysical aggregates can be found to be the person as such. And therefore, by developing these four mindfulnesses, then once they are strengthened, then when your mind is focused very soundly on the objects, then you will be able to develop what are known as the miraculous feet and so forth, the rest of the 37 factors of enlightenment. And therefore, these 37 factors cannot be just dismissed as being something which is common to both the Sanskrit and Pali traditions. We really need to develop them within ourselves. And so this gives us a very broad understanding of the teaching of the Buddha, holistic understanding. So with regard to the 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, what they show is how the suffering that we experience is brought about. Once you see the suffering, is it the case that you just feel desperate and commit suicide? No. So if you really think closely, you'll see that it is possible for us to discipline our mind by meditating on impermanence and so forth, to counter the four misconceptions of the body and the psychophysical aggregates, such as countering the conception of permanence and joyfulness. What is impermanence as seeing what is impermanent as being permanent, and what is in the nature of suffering as in the nature of joy and so forth. and holding on to some kind of a true independent existence of the body and the mind and so forth. Of course, if the body and mind were to have any independent true existence, then there shouldn't be any change in the body and the mind and so forth. And so we can actually see how this is not the case, that the body and the mind, the psychophysical aggregates, are permanent and so forth. And also, we can counter that this, because the body is filthy, we can counter the misconception that it is something pure. And then, although our pain and pleasure, experiences of pain and pleasure, which are impure experiences, are impure. Although they are impure, they actually we actually cling on to them being something very pure. And accordingly, all kinds of attachment and so forth, and then problems ensue from such a misconception. So by conceiving what is impermanent and nature of suffering and so forth as permanent, and what is impermanent and nature of suffering and so forth as permanent and so forth, and we actually indulge in all sorts of misdeeds in the world. And then these in turn are based on our clinging to some sense of an I, which is permanent, which is called independent. And when that is strong, that in turn gives rise to a very strong clinging to the objects that we actually relate with as having some permanence and independence and so forth. And so with this the right understandings of impermanence, suffering, and filthiness and selflessness, we can actually reduce lots of our negative emotions, and we can develop peace of mind. So, by understanding that the nature of mind is luminous and clarity and awareness, and also that this the different negative emotions that are in our mind are not in the nature of the mind itself, we can see how these negative emotions can be overcome and reach liberation. So perhaps I'm being too much, but I usually say that Buddhism is not about threatening people, frightening people. So His Holiness is talking to a Rinpoche, saying that he may not have heard, you may not have heard me say this, but the story goes that there was a monastery in Kham, in Tibet, and the abbot of the monastery, some people came to see him, and then these visitors asked where the abbot was, and then one of the attendants was there in the monastery, replied to this the visitors that the abbot had actually gone to the town to frighten the town's folks, and so if we emphasize on telling people that if you don't do good, then you will go to hell and so forth. I mean, it's like teaching people only the means of how to indicating them what to cultivate to gain higher rebirth only, and not about liberation. And so, regarding Buddhism, what we need to make people understand is introduce them to liberation. And once they see that this liberation is possible, it's possible for them to attain it, then they will have the aspiration to engage in the practices leading to that. And so this is how we should actually introduce Buddhism to people. So, of course, with regard to theistic gods as creators, and of course, I have studied about them in the Brahmana Vartika, and how they are rejected. Such a creator God is rejected in Brahmana Vartika. I've studied them. But on a practical term, what we need to understand is that due to their dispositions, mental dispositions, there are people for whom the teaching of theistic religions, like Creator God, teaching Creator God, is suitable for them, and therefore we need to respect them as well. And so, in the theistic religions, of course, they say that if you don't believe in a creator God, then actually you are going against the will of God and you'll go to hell and so forth. But Buddhism should not be like that. So what we need to see is have built up confidence within ourselves that by understanding that the mind is not something which is independent and truly existent, and then we need to also understand that the mind is luminous and aware, the cognitive has this cognitive nature, and with these understandings that we need to see that the negative emotions are something that we can actually get rid of from within our mind stream, and then there is a possibility to attain liberation. And that's how we should go about with teaching and introducing the teaching of the Buddha to others, and not by frightening people about going to hell and so forth.
If we look at today's world, we see that people are basically interested in developing, increasing their physical comfort, or in other words, contaminated contaminated comfort. For example, when we see a good form, we feel good. Similarly, if you hear a good sound, or a good smell, or a good touch, with regard to touch, especially sexual feeling. So these seems to be our main interest, and we are not interested in internal mental happiness. Our present scientific knowledge is mainly confined to physical aspect. They are not so much interested in the mental aspect. So I used to tell my scientific friends that it's not enough to just pay attention to external physical aspect, but also to mental part, because the main happiness and suffering arise in the mind. Because the feelings that arise out of the five sense organs are not very lasting and durable. For example, Christians, when they have single-pointed faith in God, they shed tears and the hairs on their bodies stand up. Similarly, Muslims, when they think of Allah, the same experience occurs. So that's because the experience is taking place in the mind. Whereas, such things as love, compassion, these things are mental experiences, based on internal mental experience. Therefore, they are more durable, lasting, and more stable. So, when you have internal peace and stability, even though you may external experiences are fluctuating, the person remains internally stable. Whereas, if the person doesn't have internal peace and stability, then external fluctuations can make that person greatly disturbed. Therefore, in today's world, the trend of always paying interest in external well-being is not a very good approach, and it's not going to be very successful in achieving happiness. According to what I hear, in the past, in earlier times, in Himalayan regions, there are not many people committing suicide. But in the recent past, we hear more and more stories of cases of people committing suicide. This is because our interest is directed more and more towards outside and less towards the mind, and that's causing this problem. So this is because we don't know how to pursue happiness, how the right method to pursue happiness, and that makes our mind greatly disturbed, and that leads to such crisis. So real peace should be achieved internally, in the mind. So the right method is to cultivate secular ethics, which is an inner cultivation. Excuse me. So it's important to have a good understanding on Buddhism, and then have faith, cultivate faith on the basis of good understanding. So Nagarjuna, who is like the second Buddha, is a great exponent of the meaning of emptiness. He took it upon himself the responsibility of expounding the teaching of emptiness taught by the Buddha. So many masters, all the great Buddhist masters followed him, Nagarjuna, and he's considered like the second Buddha. And today, so with this rinchen, so His Holiness is now beginning Ratnavali text, which is called Precious Garland. So in Sanskrit, it is called Ratnamali. And so the text first pays homage to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The first verse, if you have the text, that's good. If you don't have, I will just read it for you. Perhaps that will be better. Thoroughly freed from all defects and adorned with all good qualities, to the sole friend of all sentient beings, the omniscient one, I prostrate. That's the first verse. So this first verse, you can say, shows taking refuge in the Buddha. So thoroughly freed from all defects. It is not something it's not like he became free from all defects out of the blues, but through learning, contemplation, and meditation. So, with regard to meditation, first the meditator or the first have a good view on the topic or subject of one's meditation, and as one cultivates the meditation further and further, one gains what is called as experience with effort. That means if you put effort, then it moves one's mind. But if you doesn't put effort, one doesn't feel moved. And then next stage comes effortless meditation, which means one feels moved and inspiration whether or not one puts effort. And eventually, through such meditation, one attains. In the sixth stanza, by Nagarjuna, Nagarjuna says the Buddha's true body, Dharma body and form body, comes through the true paths, method and wisdom. And these two methods are derived on the basis of the two objects, ultimate truth and conventional truth. By practicing on these two truths, extended with the six perfections, eventually one accumulates the true merit of accumulation of merit and accumulation of wisdom, and attains in Buddhahood in the end. So this is also quotes Chandrakirti's a verse from Chandrakirti's Madhyamika Avatara. Like a swan with a swan with two white wings, which is one is like method, one is like wisdom, crosses the ocean of samsara and attains the state of Buddhahood. So therefore the Buddha's path is the true truth, the true path, and the true result. The true truth means conventional and the true truths, method and wisdom, and form body and Dharma body. So the Buddha's perfect result state is not costless, but rather came through a long process of practice. So and this whole path should be combined, or rather motivated by the great compassion, and then and only then the whole path will lead towards attaining the state of Buddhahood. So that you can say is the meaning of the first verse, which is taking refuge in the Buddha and Dharma and Sangha.
시순 되다 멀리 되니 게임에 봐라. 또도 타니 덤베도 좀 거 띵고도 가서. 가. 어디 다동 고버도 산대 이미 좀 정을 봐.
His Holiness is trying to trying to quote a verse from Madhyamika Avatar by Chandrakirti.
어디 대달로를 세게 나와서 랑갈로 내비 줄을 하시고 시순되다 멀리 되니 게임에 봐. 또대 타니 덤베도 좀 고번 줘서 띵이기 시작서. 다동 고버도 산대 이미지 정을 봐. 인생 게임이지. 왔다 딘지주지. 난 딘지지게 난 남자 고민이잖아.
So basically, His Holiness is trying to quote a verse from Madhyamika Avatar, which, as I translated before, emphasized the fact that the path to Buddhahood starts from the first stage, that is a good understanding on the true truths, and based on that, practice the two paths, method and wisdom, and then attain the two bodies, which is just like the metaphor given here is the white swan with two white wings left. Using the two white wings, which is like method and wisdom, the swan crosses the ocean of suffering and cyclic existence, and travels to the state of Buddhahood. So this is greatly meaningful and profound. So when you think on this subject, you feel greatly inspired and moved and motivated. So, of course, I don't have effortless experience, but I do have experience with effort. So when I think on these things, even with meditational experience with effort, I feel like even that much experience is able to suppress coarse afflictive emotions. So the method here is bodhicitta, such things, bodhicitta supported by compassion, like that. And the method, wisdom is the wisdom of emptiness. So the Buddhadharma is not something to be put on display, but it is something to be implemented. Then there will be a good. If you do that, then you will taste the flavor of the Buddhadharma, and then you will gain appreciation to the great achievements of great masters like Nagarjuna and so on. And therefore, even today, great sort of scholars are appreciating, that and are saying that Buddhadharma is like a mental science. So if one looks at the teaching in an unbiased way, the negative afflictive emotions sort of automatically loses ground, whereas positive minds becomes reinforced and stronger and stronger. The next verse. Second verse says, "O king, for you to practice Dharma, I will teach whatever is holy virtues." For it is in the vessel of excellent Dharma, thus that practice of Dharma becomes possible. So the Buddhadharma is not something that you teach people, even if people don't respect you. It is something if you should teach only if people request you, and even if people request you, you have to still check whether the person is really genuinely interested, sincere and motivated, a qualified vessel. If you find that the person is a qualified vessel, then you can teach. Otherwise, you are not. It's not recommended to teach. So you cannot say, I am Buddhist, I am a Lama, you have to listen to this. This is not allowed in Buddhism. So that's why this verse says, for it is in the vessel of excellent Dharma that practice of Dharma becomes possible. So what do you teach to a vessel of Dharma? First, the factors for higher rebirths, then of highest excellence. That's the third verse. We want happiness. There are two kinds of happiness: higher rebirth and liberation. First, I have a question. How many people among you understand my Lhasa language? His Holiness is asking this question basically to the Ladakhis. So those among you who only hear Ladakhi language, raise up your hands. Not many people raise up their hands, so it sounds like even if the teaching is translated into Ladakhi, not many people understands the teaching. So the best is just to say, I pay homage, say chaksel, jule. We all human beings, even including insects and animals, all want happiness, and human beings want higher rebirths, higher well-being, higher comfort. But our ultimate goal is liberation. Now divide higher rebirths into two. This life's higher results and next life's higher rebirths. So if you just sit there by saying, I'm striving for a good higher rebirth, and sit there and then remain a sort of unhappy person in this life, that's also useless. I have a friend who says he's meditating on impermanence and then he's a very unhappy person. That's useless. So therefore, you have to be a very happy, relaxed person, and then also try to be a good person. Then that is the method to attain a good higher rebirth. Therefore, Maitreya said, so if you meditate on bodhicitta, that is itself the method to attain higher rebirth as well as liberation in the long term. And so if you meditate bodhicitta, what the Kadamba Master said is truly true. If you practice bodhicitta, if you generate bodhicitta, it is one antidote for all the problems. For this life, future life, happiness, you gain friends, it removes, it dispels obstacles. Higher rebirths will also come through that. Liberation will also come through that. So therefore, bodhicitta is really an incredibly profound, powerful, the single most powerful and the only path to enlightenment. So the next line is, as it is after attaining higher rebirth that highest excellence gradually ensues. Which means the person who wants to attain higher rebirth in next life should first excellent. Who wants to attain liberation must first attain higher rebirth. And how to attain higher rebirth? So the next line says, that said, higher rebirth is happiness and highest excellence is liberation. Their source of attainment, and if briefly explained, are faith and initiative wisdom. Intuitive wisdom. So, which basically means wisdom realizing emptiness. So emptiness, dependent arising is of two levels. First, dependent arising of cause and effect, and dependent arising of emptiness. So in order to realize the second one, you must first have a good understanding of cause and effect. So first, try to get a good understanding of causality. Through that, one will gain a good understanding of how things are dependent on each other. So, if one realizes that if things are dependent on other factors, one understands the implication that the fact that a result comes into existence is purely because there was a cause. Nagarjuna has said in his one of his texts called Zodok, dispelling disputes, that if you can see cause and effect, the process of cause and effect clearly, the dependency, then one will see how naturally one will give rise to this thought that how can things have inherent nature if things are dependent. So once you have this, then you move on to the second level of understanding, which is the dependent arising of emptiness. So, for example, now you go to think of the cause. How can a cause be a cause? It is a cause becomes cause because it gives rise to a result. If there is no result, it cannot be cause. So this is a more subtler understanding of dependency. Now you try to sort of find out where is the cause. And if you try to investigate, you cannot find out the cause at all. It is unfindable. So this, we think the object exists. It is so, this impression is so strong in our mind. But when you analyze, you cannot find it. So when we think of the Buddha, it's so strongly, such a strong impression on us. But if you try to find out the Buddha, to point out, identify, it's unfindable. It's unfindable. So first try to get good understanding on the dependent arising of causality, cause and effect, and then use that to gain understanding on the subtler level of dependency, which is dependent arising based of imputation. So this is called in Sanskrit patit samutpad, dependent arising. So in order to gain a good understanding on this philosophy, one has to have good intelligence, wisdom. In Dharamsala, sometimes when we teach Dharma, monkeys come and play around the teaching venue. But the monkeys don't have a clue of what's going on, even though the teaching is going on, because they lack the faculty of intelligence. So therefore, in order to pursue liberation, one needs intelligence, because intelligence is required to understand dependent arising. So therefore the text says first high rebirth, then liberation. So therefore His Holiness goes very fast. The fifth, he just finished reading the fifth verse, which says, having faith, one realizes upon Dharma. Possessing wisdom, one realizes truth. Of these two, wisdom is primary, yet it is faith that precedes. I recently went to Bombay and to give teaching to new Buddhists down there. And they were telling me that my general teachings are a bit hard for them, and they request me to teach them a simpler one. I didn't like that idea very much, because if they don't understand, then they have to study it. If you just say it's hard, I don't want to listen to it, then what's the point? If it's hard, then you have to strive, be diligent, and try to overcome that hardness. When I first came from Amdo to Tibet, I have no interest in the studies I didn't like. By 8 and 9, I memorized Abhisamaya Alankara, then Madhyamika Avatara, then studied Prajnaparamita commentaries. Also memorized many of them. And slowly I developed interest. By 12, 13, I started learning debate, and I started gaining some taste. And by 16, I started developing interest in practicing. And now since then, 60 years have passed, and my mind has really undergone great changes as a result of my diligence. And I have always been practicing and thinking, contemplating on Buddha's teaching. First, emptiness I thought on, then on liberation, then bodhicitta. Slowly I realized that bodhicitta is possible, and then I felt motivated.
지난 동호회 니지 전부 용시한 요마다. 니지 전부 써야 돼. 싫어고 저도 제가.
Earlier, His Holiness is now talking to telling the translator. He said something like, "Great compassion." His Holiness, great compassion can happen only if compassion is combined with emptiness. A singular compassion can never be a great compassion, because an isolated compassion maybe we all have, depending on what degree we may have. Excuse me. Next, stanza 6. How to attain this intelligence of emptiness? We have to understand the truth. To understand truth, we have to be unbiased. For example, if we have great sort of attachment and clinging to the view of a singular solitary permanent self. One day, I have a long time ago, I have a Bihari friend, and when we talked about the selflessness topic, he was shivering, he was trembling, because he was having a great fear. Then I told him, relax. We are friends. I'm not saying the self doesn't exist. I'm just saying there is a self, but the qualification of the self is lack of inherent existence. So this is a genuine crisis that people can face. Recently, when I was in Holland, I was giving an introduction teaching on Buddhism, and I also explained teachings of other religious traditions, also like Shamka, the Samka school, the Jain school. During question and answer, one of the persons said, if there is no creator, he feels great uncomfortable. They feel like if there is no creator, he feels like there is no basis for thinking. His Holiness told him, okay, don't worry about that. Just think. There is creator. If whatever you feel is suitable to you, keep on with that. I feel more comfortable with thinking there is no creator. So I believe in. I don't believe in creator. If you want to believe in creator and if you are happy with that, just carry on with that. I also used to have a Christian friend. He is a great man with a lot of compassion. So we discussed on things like single-pointed meditation. One day he started talking about emptiness. I told him that's not your business. That's the business of Buddhists. It's not good for you. Don't think about that. This Buddhist will mind on this matter. Because this is my policy. You have different kinds of dispositions. And in addition, people's mind have been already sort of changed, casted by the traditions they were born in. So faith combined by intelligence means unbiased intelligence and reasoning based on reasoning, and faith that arose out of that. That is called genuine faith. And the adversaries for this kind of faith out of desire, hatred, fear, ignorance, is saying, my philosophy is the best, then hatred, today's religious problems are exactly arising due to these kind of problems. This is stanza 6. Not violating the Dharma out of desire, hatred, fear, and ignorance. One is called the faithful or superior use vessel for highest. Even among Tibetan Buddhism, if we say, I am Kagyu, I am Gelug, I am Sakya, I am Nyingma, and then have hatred towards each other, this is pure ignorance, and sort of this leads to fear, and sometimes this becomes like sort of a political sort of divisive political tool to make political camps and groups. So here this stanza mentions 4: desire, hatred, fear, and ignorance, and this can be overcome through the faithful. Stanza 7. Whoever having current His Holiness is on stanza 7. So His Holiness here the text is talking about the 10 virtuous actions, which are the path to attain higher rebirths. So the action of body, speech, and mind, knowingly, like 3 out of speech, like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, etc., which are out of speech, and through mind, covetedness, harmful intent, like that. And the 3rd line says, knowingly acts to benefit oneself and others at all times is indeed wise. Refraining from killing, avoiding stealing, relinquishing others' powers, forsaking lies, divisive speech, harsh words, and senseless talk. Callous. So it's on verse 10, giving respectfully, revering the worthy, and being loving, being respectful to your parents, people who are higher than you in knowledge, virtue, etc. And being loving means compassionate and loving kindness to others. So he's on these stanzas mentions altogether 16 10 virtuous actions plus another 6 such as not smoke, not drinking, etc. So these are considered as the path to attain higher rebirths. Regarding drinking, if you can completely give up drinking, it's very good. Even if you cannot completely give up, just drink moderately so that you don't get drunk. That would be good. Maybe Ladakhis like drinking chang, the Tibetan wine, and Westerners have this culture of during parties and during meals, drinking a little bit of wine. So it's probably a little difficult to completely give up drinking, but being moderate is advisable. Buddha has said that those who consider me as their teacher should not even drink a drop of liquor, intoxicant. So lay people should try to drink moderately so as to not become drunk, because if you become drunk, then there's the probability of getting involved in brawls and fighting, quarreling like that. So maybe it's even better to just drink tsampa soup. And for monks and ordained people, intoxicants should not is completely not allowed. In Himalayan regions and even in Tibet, in more remote areas, there were some monks drink a little bit of chang. It is not good if we go to some monasteries and passing by some monks' rooms, we can smell chang. It's really disgraceful and shameful. It's not good. Don't do that. I have been to Spiti and stayed in a monastery there once, and there was a monk there who was taking care of the shrine. Very good monk, very impressive and inspiring. We were talking, and he had been to Tibet in early times and has studied at Trashilimba Monastery. So jokingly, I told him, is the chang from Shigatse better or the chang of Spiti better? Without hesitation, he said, without hesitation, he said, Shigatse's chang is much better. So this means that he was drinking chang. And also during the monks' summer retreat, monks go down to the valleys to picnic. At the end of the summer retreat, there is a picnic period for monks. And by evening, as the monks returned to their monasteries uphill, most of them were a little drunk and walking in a sloppy way. So if we look back, many of the things that we did in Tibet was wrong, like sectarianism, not paying enough attention to monks' Vinaya rules. If we continue with this kind of system, the Buddhism will not exist. It will not continue. Will continue. It will terminate one day. We have in Tibetan tradition, we have a saying, some family says, I have a boy, he's not very clever, he is kind of sloppy. Let's make him a monk and put him in a monastery. If you do like that, the monasteries will, and Buddhism will not be in good shape. So if you want to be a good monk, if you are genuine and determined, then it's good to become Sangha. And don't enter Sangha just as to find a livelihood there.
뭐네 전에 지금 경제적으로 지금 다 든지지가 타네 아니 마신 용수 명예당 사야 돼 어다 마신 버지 천디 낭신 도야 돼 근데 로직 렌 뒤춤보이나 아니 저중 통첩으로 봐 저중 못은 용이
So, with this, the monks should be knowledgeable, determined, and sort of hardworking, very sort of focused on their dharma. So then the sangha will have more respect. In Tibet, we have a system of monk tax. That means each family has to donate, or in other words, offer a member of the one child to the monastery. Like, that's not a very good thing to do, but it was passed. Real sangha should be voluntary. So we should not leave everything to sort of custom and tradition. I'm saying this out of sort of concern. I personally don't lose anything. So that's why I'm sort of stressing on these things. We must change our system, and we should not just carry on with old systems, sort of corrupt and hypocritical ways of our functioning in our older system. Stanza 11. So Dharma is for protecting us from suffering. How? So the real meaning of Dharma is not harming others and trying to help others. I usually say Buddhism is divided into two: action and view. Action is not harming others, because if you harm others, the result will be bad results to yourself. So the essence of the Dharma is, if you are capable, help others. If you are not capable, at least don't harm. That is the essence. If this practice is not there, if you do not understand this or implement this, and then torture yourself with other methods, is useless, because there is no dividend out of that. Stanza 12. Stanza 13. So if you say you are practicing Dharma, and in practice you torture your body, self-mortification, these are wrong paths, because this doesn't help you in any way. So instead, practice the 10 virtuous actions, refrain from the 10 non-virtuous actions, this is the right path to higher happiness. Stanza 14 and 15. Because through the 10 non-virtuous actions you harm others and create negative karma, and the negative karmas give rise to negative results to yourself, negative experiences, so it harms yourself. His Holiness reached stanza 18. So these previous stanzas list out the 10 non-virtuous actions and their negative results. Stanza 19, which starts by the first line, which says, as for those called non-virtuous, and so on. Stanzas 20, desire, hatred, and ignorance. So, in short, the three poisons, if we let ourselves be under the control of the three poisons and engage in actions on the basis of self-cherishing mind, thinking this is nice to me, this is nice to gives nice feeling to me. So all those thoughts and actions give rise to negative results to yourself. So the stanza 20 says, desire, hatred, and ignorance, and the actions they create are non-virtuous. Because these thoughts abandon others and also lie to others. Such negative thoughts and actions like stealing, lying, abusing, and so on, all arise out of this self-cherishing mind and the three poisonous minds. So, so the 10 virtuous actions, you can think in two ways: abandoning them for the sake of yourself, and abandoning themselves for the sake of others. So if you abandon these, refrain from the 10 non-virtuous actions for your own sake, it helps. But still, at the core of your heart, it's your selfish thought, because to protect yourself from the negative results of the 10 non-virtuous actions, you are refraining from them. So the more powerful path is to refrain from the 10 non-virtuous actions out of your compassion and love and concern for the welfare of others. Stanza 22. Stanza 22. Stanza 23. Excuse me. So now let's say you practice 10 virtuous actions and experience the results of the 10 virtuous actions. But now the text talks about not being content with that, because these virtuous results are fleeting experiences. One has to aim for higher goals. So the text says, it talks about higher rebirths. So let me try to read out stanza 22 and 3. Withdraw our body, speech, and mind from whatever is non-virtuous, and always turn them to virtues. Thus, Dharma is explained in these two aspects. Stanza 23. This Dharma releases us fully from the states of hell, hungry spirits, and animals. It bestows happiness, glory, and dominion in the states of human and God. So here God, stanza 24, through concentration, immeasurable, and formlessness, one enjoys the pleasure of Brahma and so forth. This, as such, is a brief summary of the Dharma of higher rebirth and their effort. So higher rebirths here means rebirths as humans and in God realms. God realms here refers to the form and formless realms. In the form realms, there are such realms like the four realms. The first four realms in the form realm are the first concentration, second concentration, third concentration, and fourth concentration. And then higher than that, there's the immeasurable and the formlessness, and so on. So therefore, until now, the text is talking about higher rebirths. Now, next, the text talks about ultimate goal of our path, which is liberation. Stanza 25. So this ultimate liberation can be attained only through understanding the emptiness, the ultimate truth, and overcoming ignorance of self-attachment. And this I that we usually so much self-cherish, is this self really existing as we used to sort of think of? Just like this example of the story I told you of the Bihari monk, Indian Bihari monk. So stanza 26 says, I does not exist, nor will it. Mind does not exist, nor will it. While the childish are frightened by this, for the learned it ends all fear. So the text says, not only the self doesn't exist, even the aggregates that comprises the self also do not exist inherently. In Asanga, Asanga is a proponent of the Yogacara school, mind-only school, and he criticizes the Madhyamika philosophy for propounding selflessness, lack of inherent existence. So even within the Buddhist schools, there are people who cannot withstand the fright of this idea of complete annihilation of inherent nature. So therefore the Buddha taught, understanding this situation, the Buddha taught three lower schools which stress the existence of, which accepts self-existence. So the last line of the stanza 26 says, "For the learned, it ends all fear." Just look at how afflicted emotions arise in us. Nagarjuna says, action and afflicted emotion ends as a result of, by the power of overcoming ignorance. Samsara arises out of afflicted emotion and karma, and these two arise out of ignorance. And that comes of ignorance comes out of Tenzing Treba, sort of holding to inherent self or inherent truth. I know an old scientist. Now he's in his 90s. When I met him, he was in his 80s. Aaron Beck, that's his name. He told me he's a scientist who did research on for many years on people who have stress and hypertension related problem. He told me that when we have great hatred and dislike and look at a person who we don't like, 90% is projected by our own mind. So this is like 100% in agreeing with what Madhyamika Mulakarika by Nagarjuna says. So, our wrong view disturbs our view of the object, and then that leads us to project something different than what is actually there on the object. And then we feel sort of obsessed with that object. So, when you say that object that you are so obsessed, that image that you are so obsessed with is completely non-existent, then one feels greatly shocked. So when in the Heart Sutra, the Buddha says, no eyes, no nose, no taste, so on and so forth, we might think the Buddha is saying something contradictory. But if you think well and deeper and more profoundly by studying text of Nagarjuna, so the point is trying to understand the meaning of emptiness is dependent arising. The meaning of dependent arising is emptiness. So the two imply each other and are complementary, or in other words, they are directly they directly infer each other. So, through thinking in that way, one realizes that if something exists, then there's no option but to exist in dependence as a dependent arising phenomena. If something exists from its own accord inherently, then it should be findable if you search for it. But that is not the case. So therefore, His Holiness quotes one verse which says that all the labels, that conventional labels in this world that we use, employ to refer to things, to convey our ideas, are all so unfindable if you sort of analyze. They should all be, they are all so we have to think how how ignorance leads, so this wrong view leads to ignorance, ignorance leads to wrong projections, and then the three poisonous minds, and so on and so forth. So, suffering won't go away just by praying, or may the Buddha bless me, or so it will go away only through overcoming ignorance, self-grasping. Stanza 28, that I exist and mine exist are ultimately false. Chandrakirti says, first one feels self-grasping, attached to oneself, then to mine, and then action starts like water pulley. Stanza 29. So the ultimate cause of samsara is grasping five aggregates as existing inherently, which in turn gives rise to self-grasping and then action. Stanza 31. Stanza 32. So this self, or the I, it is just a mere label, because if you try to identify or find out where the I, it's unfindable. It's just a sort of a label, an appearance, a mere projection. So in the ultimate analysis, the self, the aggregates, they are unfindable, are purely non-existent. That's why it says none of them ultimately exist. Stanza 33. So suffering, our perception of suffering, everything, all phenomena in the universe appears, but doesn't exist as they appear. stanza 34. So, through meditation on emptiness, our afflictive emotions gradually sort of loses their grip and becomes weaker and weaker, and eventually only through the realization or the profound understanding of emptiness, afflictive emotion, ignorance will be overcome and eliminated from its very root. Stanza 34 says, when the exalted Ananda, having comprehended meaning such as this, and attained the divine Dharma vision, he revealed this to the bhikshus.
So from verse number 35, as long as there is grasping at aggregates, so long in view of these, there is grasping at I, and when there is grasping at I, there are actions where from, in turn, ensue rebirths. And then this I have explained already. So everything in samsara and nirvana, of course, there are composite phenomena, composed phenomena, compounded phenomena within nirvana as well. And so they are also born, they come from causes. And so we can say that these things do not come without causes, because it would be too much to say that. So if things come from causes, we can do analysis whether they come from a cause which has the same nature as the effect, or do they come from inherently different cause, or do the effects come from inherently different cause? So in both cases there are logical fallacies. So through the three phases of the cycle of existence, one revolves like a firebrand, without beginning, middle, and end, without mutually giving a rise to one another, because it is not acquired from self and others, or even in the 3 times, grasping of I is finally exhausted, and therefore the actions and rebirths. So if you hold on to the view and a kind of absolute view saying something exists or not, does not exist, then of course there's no space for analysis. Therefore, when in order to check whether things have own nature or not and so forth, we need to have a space to do analysis. So even if you say things do exist or do not exist, I mean, you need to have still a space to think. You need to really use your mind. And in the case of Dzogchen and Chakchen, the Mahamudra, when someone, of course, has actualized this innate clear-light mind, and from that point of view, that vision or that experiential point of view, then maybe they would be able to say from experience that there is no samsara, no nirvana, no sentient beings, no Buddhas and so forth. Otherwise, without really having this kind of confidence within yourself and real through experience, of course, then if you say things do exist or not and so forth, it doesn't make sense. So seeing causes and effects arising as well as ceasing, and one in this world ultimately discerns neither existence nor non-existence, listening to Dharma that ends all sufferings. If one develops unreasonable fear towards what is not frightening, such fear arises only through utter lack of understanding. When in nirvana all these cease, you fear not. Yet, when the non-existence is explained here, why then do you fear? So, commenting on verse number 43, where it says, being non-virtuous and leading to bad rebirths, it is called false view. So this is like a nihilistic view. It says in the beginning of the verse, in brief, the view of nihilism holds that actions bear no fruits. And then next verse, in brief, shows that if you hold on to what really appears to you, what appears is that things do have some kind of objective existence, and so if you hold on to that, then you are falling into the extreme of eternalism or permanence. And when you see the dependent reality of the dependent origination, verse number 45, consciously pacifying existence and non-existence, and foregoing virtue and non-virtue, one finds liberation from good and bad rebirths. This the Noble One has well explained. So through the application of the counterfact measure of understanding this insight into how things really are, it acts as an antidote to our ignorance about the true nature of things. And seeing production as having causes, one goes beyond nihilism. Seeing cessation as having causes, one no longer asserts existentialism. Something formally or simultaneously produced is not a cause. And ultimately there is no cause. And because such production is not known, either conventionally or ultimately. So whenever you analyze something, we can see that you cannot really find anything when you put them under the lens of analysis. Nothing can be found whatsoever. So here we are engaging in a Dharma discourse. You see me and I see you. And this is something, a fact. So the fact that I'm teaching you and is there, and the fact that you see me is a fact that it is there. But when you actually analyze, examine the Dalai Lama who is giving the teaching, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, well, if you say whether the body of me, my body is me, you'll see that it is not me. They are not me. Called my head, my legs, my tummy, and so forth are not me. And then within the mind also, I'm not my mind. And so in quantum physics, this is what they conclude, that nothing exists objectively. So if you actually examine something, and within that object you cannot find anything as being that object itself. And so what you see is that it does not exist objectively. Now how does the thing exist? Of course, then by default what you find is that the thing exists by way of designation. And so it says, because such production is not known either conventionally and ultimately. And so something that exists exists by way of three criteria. One is that it conventionally exists by convention, and then that it cannot be invalidated by other conventional cognitions or perceptions. and then it should not also be invalidated by ultimate analysis into the nature of things. And so these are the three criteria as Rinpoche gives in his the great insight section of Lamrim Chemo, and no other text in no other text you find such mention of the criteria, these three criteria. So because this exists, that ensues. Just as when there's long, there's short. Because this has arisen, that has that arises. Just as when there is flame, there is light. When there is long, there is short. So if you take these three fingers, the ring finger, if you ask whether it's long or short, you cannot say it's long or short. But when you put it together with the middle finger, it's short. When you put it with the small finger, the little finger, then it's long. So by itself, you cannot talk about whether it's long or short. And then with regard to three times, past is gone, future is yet to come, and then if you don't posit a present, then you cannot posit past and future in relation to it. But when you really look for the present, you cannot find it. So past, future, and present are merely conceptually designated and conventionally designated with our language and name. For example, if we talk about a past century, future century, and then the current century. The current century, if it were to exist inherently, objectively, then within it you have decades, past and future decades, and so forth. You cannot talk about them. And therefore, you see, everything is relative. So a decade also, within a decade you can talk about past years and future years and present years and so forth. And then within a year you have 12 months, and then within those 12 months you have past and future, and within a month you have the earlier part of the month, later part of the month, and middle part of the month and so forth. And similarly, a day has this earlier part, middle part, and so forth. And therefore, you cannot talk about a past, future, and present, which are objectively existing, past, future, and present. So everything is relative. Even action, agent, and the actor are relative. And therefore, things, if you assert that things are relative, that they are dependent, and that they are designated, then everything can be posited. Without being able to do that, you cannot talk about or you cannot posit anything. And even in the case of quantum physics, they, of course, focus on external matter. And when they really find that nothing can be posited objectively, then they are in a dilemma. And so in India, for over 1,000 years ago, I mean, it has been said that things do not have any objective existence, but they are by default merely designated, and nominal. And so we have a space to think about how things exist in this way. Yet, for verse number 49, yet not by way of their own nature, when a flame is not produced, the light too does not arise. 50 seeing effects arising from causes, one considers the world as arising through fabrications. Fabrications here refers to the conceptually designating. Conceptual designation. One thus does not assert non-existence. You're refuting whatever arises through fabrications to be existing in reality. One does not assert existence. So things do appear to have some objective existence, and if you hold on to that kind of appearance and then assert that things do have an objective existence, I mean, you will not be able to hold on to that position if you were pushed through reason. In the Madhyamaka Avatara, there is a mention from the opponents that there's no need to reject the production from other, because it is actually something that is empirical experience for us, that we can see things arise from another thing. And so this is here also in the verse number 51, the same kind of question is raised. And not relying on duality, one finds liberation. An object seen from afar is seen clearer by those nearby. So if you are far from an object, then something appears, but if that thing were to have any objective independent existence, then it should be clearer and clearer as you go nearer to it, but that's not the case. So if mirage were water, why is it not seen by those nearby? Those seeing from afar see this world as real, yet those nearby do not see it as such. Lacking true characteristic, it is like a mirage. And so there are different reasonings to prove emptiness, such as the sevenfold reasoning, and then the Vajra splinter reasoning, and so forth. A mirage appears like water, but is not, as it ain't water. Likewise, aggregates appear as self, but is not, as it ain't self. Thinking of mirage as water, one may walk towards it, but unwise is one who then wonders, the water ain't here water anymore. Likewise, conceiving this mirage-like world to be existent or non-existent would be utterly ignorant. With ignorance, one cannot find liberation. Nihilists go to unhappy states. Existentialists go to happy states. Knowing well the way things are and not relying on both, one finds liberation. Verse number 58, 59 and 60. Verse number 60 says, they neither actually avow nihilism nor behave or think as such. So the bodhisattvas in their practice, I mean, of course, they do take into account the law of causality and so forth. And so, because they aim for enlightenment, how can they be called nihilists? So Milarepa, Justice Milarepa has said something when he was said that he had actually fallen into nihilism, and his response was, if whether I had fallen into it or not, look at and watch my own behavior. So ask the worldly Sankhya, Vaisheshikas, Nirgrantha, who describe person as aggregates, if they ever assert anything beyond existence or non-existence. Thus, the eternal teaching of the Buddhas that transcend existence and non-existence is said to be profound. This, in fact, is called the essence of the Dharma. Destroyed, they... So, verse number 63 down, rejects the true existence in things. Destroyed, they neither go nor come, nor remain for even a moment more. How can the self and the world that transcend the three times truly exist? Since both do not truly go, nor come, nor remain, what difference could there actually be between samsara and nirvana? Verse number 65, because there is no abidance. If production and cessation are not true, how could there ultimately be production, abidance, and cessation? Verse number 66, if something constantly changes, how could that thing be non-momentary? If there are no changes, how could it actually change into something else? These are very terse, difficult verses. I had been very busy and had not time to read these verses. Because something ceases partially or completely. If it is termed momentary, then as no changes are then seen, both are therefore unreasonable. If momentary, if it would not subsist, then how could it ever age? If non-momentary due to being constant, how then could it ever age? Just as a moment has an end, one must search for its beginning and middle. So if you really look at a moment, you cannot find anything as being past, present, future, objectively. As moment itself is made of 3 times, the world does not abide for even a moment. Thinking of beginning, middle, and so verse number 71 says, having different paths, it is not single, for nothing exists without paths. Without one, there cannot be many. Without existence, there can't be non-existence. So these shows the positions of Chittamatra. Due to the destruction of or counterforce of if existent is said to become non-existent, how could there be destruction and counteraction when existence itself is impossible? Therefore, on attainment of nirvana, the world does not actually diminish. When asked if the world has an end, the victorious one thus did not respond. So when while grasping or holding on to the notion that things do have some objective existence, for example, the Savatantrika Madhyamakas philosophers do, because of holding on to objective existence, they do define something that exists as called having both the criteria of objective existence as well as being conceptually designated. So combined, these two combined gives something an identity of existence. So we fear because of holding on to objective independent existence, as if there is something existing from the object side of the object, and because of that we have fear. Therefore, on non-attainment nirvana, the world does not actually diminish. When asked if the world has an end, the victorious one thus did not respond. Not imparting the profound teachings to such unsuitable receptacles, the learned therefore understand the omniscient one to be a knower of all. The Dharma and high excellence is profound and without grasping, and also without base. And verse number 80 down shows the selflessness of a person. If a person neither is neither earth, nor water, nor wind, space, nor fire, nor consciousness, nor all of this, what person exists aside of these? And the answer is, a person is composite of 6 constituents. It is therefore not real. So a person is designated on the basis of these 6 constituent factors that were given earlier in the previous verse, as just as it is said in the Madhyamaka Avatara, that when you do analyze a person through the sevenfold reasoning, of course you cannot find a person or a chariot. So although you cannot find a chariot through these analysis, then nevertheless a chariot can be posited or asserted, because it is merely designated on the basis of the paths. And since a person is designated on the combination or the composite of these 6 constituent factors, but what happens to us is that a person appears as if it has some objective existence, and that is not real. Likewise, each constituent is itself a composite. It is therefore not real. As the Heart Sutra says, and it goes through the form, sound, and order, and so forth. Therefore, it says it is not real, therefore not real. And so here, both the selflessness of the persons and phenomena are mentioned or taught. Aggregates are not self. It does not contain them. They do not contain it. It is not without them. So we are analyzing whether a person is one with the aggregates, or it is separate or different from the aggregates, and so forth. So aggregates and self are connected with like fire and fuel. How can a self therefore exist? Therefore elements are not earth. It does not contain them. They do not contain it. It is not without them. And because it... So here there is the differentiation between elements and what's the product of elements. So elements here refers to very subtle factors, subtle constituent factors, and how can there be self? Therefore, how can a self therefore exist? And because it applies to each of them elements, it's like self are not are also unreal. Earth, water, fire, wind do not exist by way of their own entities. When three are absent, one does not exist. When one is absent, the three do not exist. If each does not exist when three are absent, and three do not exist when one is absent, each by itself would not exist. How then can their composite arise yet? So if things were to have some objective existence, then they cannot be relative, or they cannot be dependent on others. Yet if they each exist distinctly, why there is no fire without fuel? So is motility, obstruction, cohesion, in the case of water, wind, and earth. If things are about fire, is widely known, how can the other three be different? How then is it possible for the three to not comply with the dependent reality? How can that existing by itself be mutually existent? How can that not existing by itself be mutually existent? So of course, in the case of the Chittamatrans, so because here the Master Nagarjuna is not saying that things are of one nature with a mind, but he's saying that the things are merely designated. So, first we are not able to keep up with the reading. His Holiness is on verse numbers 97 and 98. 97 says, all these worldly phenomena are like fuel of the fire of consciousness. With rays through thorough discernment, they are burnt and then pacified. And verse number 99 is what His Holiness is commenting on. Just as physical form and mere designations. Just as physical forms are mere designations, so too is space mere designation. So without elements, how can there be form? So is the case with name itself. Since things are merely designated, form and so forth are merely designated, sometimes what we can also conclude is that the name itself is merely designated, merely labeled. Sometimes we get the notion or idea that, of course, things are designated, they are named. But then when we say this, we get a notion, some kind of idea that, oh, the name must have some intrinsic existence. That's not the case at all. So this is what is said here. So is the case with name itself. So everything is called rejected to have any kind of objective existence. All objectifications are rejected. And so when you are able to do that, then there's no way no way for our attachment and hatred to arise. So even in regards to attachment and hatred, of course, they can arise on the basis of clinging to some grosser form of self, and then, of course, those are the product of the clinging to true existence in things. Whereas there are certain negative emotions like attachment and hatred which actually go together with the grasping at true existence as well. And so it is very clearly mentioned in the commentary on the 400 verses by Master Chandrakirti that there are those negative emotions which are produced by our true grasping at true existence, and that then also there are those negative emotions which go concordant with the true grasping at true existence. Consider feeling, discrimination, and formative mental factors in consciousness to be like elements and also self. So know that six constituents are thus without self. Here ends the first chapter of Precious Garland, presentation of higher rebirth and highest excellence. So we have finished exactly at 11:30. So we'll stop here for today. This is dedication verse. Whatever dedications the Buddhas of the three times make, we do so also following them. Although these texts are very quite difficult, but you should actually study this kind of text and not just try to understand the meaning based on relying on one text alone, but you should also study other texts and then bring those understandings from other texts together. And then you can also compare and contrast between different texts and written by Master Nagarjuna, and then maybe you are able to gain some understanding of what emptiness really means. So you should not think that emptiness is something very difficult to understand, and therefore I cannot practice Dharma, I cannot understand Dharma. This should not you should not do that.